You're talking about wrestling with faith. Faith is not a problem. Everything, I don't believe that. How am I supposed to believe that? Or I wish I could believe, but I don't believe. Belief is not the issue. The issue is, what do we know for sure is true, and therefore whether you believe it or not doesn't make any difference because it's true anyway. In other words, if there is something that we know is true, we should trust it and believe in it and be devoted to it. But don't begin with believing something.
What is belief, as opposed to intelligent conclusion? How do you explain the difference?
Belief means you accept what you're told without understanding it, without questioning it.
And what is safe to believe?
Nothing.
So where does...
Here's the point. Everybody thinks that religion begins with faith. And maybe that's true for religion. But we're not trying to be religious here. We're trying to be intelligent, right? Mm-hmm. So Rambam begins with the first instruction. It is your obligation to know the Creator. Don't believe it.
And this is Yiddishkeit?
Yes.
So not a religion.
Right.
So Yiddishkeit is based on an intelligent conclusion.
Right. And that's the greatness of Avraham. Others had experience with God. Adam and Chava had an interesting experience with God. Noach had a project they worked together on. But imagine you're Noach, and God talks to you, and you know for sure that God is real. Are you sure there's no other God? No.
It's an experience.
Yeah. So you experience something very holy, very... who's to say there isn't another one next week?
Intellectually.
Avram came along and said, there's no other way. He didn't start to believe in God, he started to understand God. So, Avram as Beirei, he didn't believe like Noach. He recognized. In other words, he showed logically how there must be a God and there can't be two gods, and God has to be whatever, infinite, and so on and so forth. So Chabad began with Avraham. And that's why Rambam says, the beginning is the knowledge, the absolute understanding, conviction that this is the way it is, logically, because it can't be any other way. Now, what can't be any other way? A religion? What can't be any other way is the world cannot begin without a beginning. Where is the beginning? That's it. It's a very logical, simple question. We all know, there's no doubt anymore, that there was a time the world did not exist. There were no planets, there were no stars, there were no nothing. There was nothing. Okay, what happened? The best science can come up with so far is that there was an explosion. What exploded? People say the problem with that theory is you're not explaining where the original substances came from. There were gases, there were particles, they exploded. Where did they come from? That's not the biggest problem. The big problem, which scientists don't want to deal with, but they're going to have to, the question is not what happened. The question is why. If in the beginning there was no physical universe, why did anything happen? There was this guy on the radio talking about intelligent design. You know, you can't explain the existence of stuff on the world without believing in God. And somebody called the radio station and said, do you know that people used to believe in God because of thunder? How else do you explain thunder? Who could make a sound like that? Only God. So, because they heard thunder, they were convinced there's a God. Then they found out what thunder is. Right now, we don't understand, for example, how human blood came into existence, because you can't put it together piece by piece. So evolving won't create human blood. So the only explanation is God created the world. So this guy who called in said, you're doing the same thing. You don't know how blood can come into existence, so wait until next week, you'll figure it out. How does that prove there's a God? So let's back up. First of all, what do we mean by God? Like somebody says, what gives God the right to intervene in my life? Interesting. Intervene. I have a life, I exist, and he comes and intervenes. Then he's not God. That's like saying, how dare genetic stuff interfere in my life? Genetic stuff is your life. I don't need this genetic stuff messing me up. Yeah, you do. Without the genetic stuff, there is no life. So if we're talking about God, we're talking about the reality behind our existence. Not interested? This is a religion? So, the first thing we know about God is that he's original. If everything else was created, then the creator cannot himself be created. You got to start with something that already exists. Why does he exist? Because he's different. He's not like us. His existence is real, ours is manufactured. So if you don't assume that before we existed, something real existed, then we're just ignorant. Then we don't understand this world, we don't understand anything about ourselves, we know nothing. So it is completely compelling and logical that in the beginning there was something that didn't need to be created. You can take it back 16 billion years, 100 billion years. That's not the point. Somewhere, something was real. Because we are not.
Meaning, we're not real by the fact that
we needed to be created. We are manufactured.
it's logically a logical conclusion based on the fact that
we didn't always exist.
The world?
Mm-hmm. So then the question would be, if there exists something that doesn't need to be created, which means it's eternal, it always was and always will be. We are not. If there is something that always was and always will be, why would he create the world?
Step back. Where do we, from what do we come to the conclusion that this world isn't real? That it had to have a source. I guess the Rambam explains that.
Everybody believes that. Science knows that the world had a beginning, and before that it didn't exist. We can measure the age of the moon, the age of the sun. Mm-hmm. They're even predicting that just like it had a beginning, it will also have an end. It'll burn out, it'll disappear, and go back to being nothing.
Mm-hmm.
So, to come at the question intelligently, you got to know where you sit. You can't take your existence for granted and then wonder what's real. You've just made yourself real. So you appoint yourself God, and then you wonder whether there's a God. You see what I'm saying? Say, I'm real. What else is there? Okay, then you're God. The whole point is we know that we're not real, and we want to understand why we're here. That's not religion. That should be science. Like this bumper sticker that said, I used to be an atheist, then I realized I'm God. If you're an atheist, you're God. Because if God means the true existence, well, if there's no creator, then you are the true existence. Which we know is not correct because you weren't here a few years ago. And the earth wasn't here a few years ago. So the real question that needs to be asked is, why did the world come into existence? That is such an intelligent question. How the world came into, that's a curious question. Interesting. Not necessary. Unless you want to create a world and you've got to figure out how the first guy did it. But if your purpose is not to create a world, you just want to understand what you're doing in this world, that's a really intelligent question. So when somebody says, what is my purpose in life? Why are we here? And you say, believe in God. It's like, I asked you an intelligent question, you tell me a religious answer. That's the frustration.
Religious, defined religious, would be
a set of beliefs that don't need to be verified or understood.
And Judaism is something that we come to with.
What have we been studying for 4,000 years? 10 Commandments?
And saying it's not based on belief either.
No.
It doesn't start with belief.
No.
And we're not afraid that the intellectual conclusion we may come to the wrong place. We may make the wrong choices, the wrong decisions.
Obviously, there is emunah, there is belief. We're born with a certain amount of belief, like children. We have a natural. That's not your obligation or your first commitment to Judaism, is to believe. If you believe, fine. Some people have a natural. And once you know, then you have to take it to the next step, where you put your complete trust in it. But you know what you're trusting, because you know who God is. In every synagogue, most synagogues, on top of the ark or someplace on the wall it says, Da mipnei mi ata emet. Doesn't say believe. It says know before who you stand. What do we know? We know that we believe. What do we know about who we're davening to? Unfortunately, most yeshivas, just between us, most yeshivas tell you that there's nothing to know. You can't know, you can't understand, you won't know, forget about it. You just undid everything.
So faith. So what's the role of the faith plays the role of what of assuring this understanding that you have, conclusion that you come to recognize.
When you come to recognize that there is reality that isn't you, that reality is absolute. So once you get to know that there is a creator, you realize there is much more to him than you'll ever know. Because we don't understand what it means to be eternal. You don't understand what it means not to be created. In fact, the one thing we know for sure about God is that he doesn't believe in anybody. He's not religious. He doesn't worship a creator.
Mm-hmm.
So we don't understand that. We are completely dependent on a creator. So once you get to know him, then you realize how much more there is that you don't know.
So then when it comes in to what you don't know.
Yeah. Faith means the recognition of things we cannot know. Ask any person on the street, is there more that we don't know than what we do know? Or do we know more than what we don't know? Everybody will tell you, we don't know anything. What the bleep do we know? Okay, so we know there's more than what we know. So on the one hand, that's an intelligent conclusion. And on the other hand, there's where your faith begins. So we understand God because he is the reality behind our existence. But we don't understand what the reality behind his existence. That's his little secret. How do you get to be eternal? How do you grow up eternal? So, another thing. That we don't, the things we don't see, for a modern 21st century thinking human being, most of scientific discoveries of the last century is things we can't see. And that's closer to reality than the things we can see. Do we forget that little tidbit? So what does it mean? Oh, I can't see him, so how can he be real? What are you talking about? You never got past 4th grade? Did you ever see an electron? A photon? Did you ever see a germ? It's such a silly question. And it comes from being overly materialistic. If I see it, it's real. If not, not. What, you never took a science course? Never looked at a physical object under a microscope? What you don't see is so much bigger, greater, and more real than what we do see. Just a personal, an emotional example. After your parent passes away, he doesn't exist? Because you can't see him? Better yet, your father passes away, and you're looking at him, at his body. What changed? Something you can't see. So what is this hang-up on wanting to see things? In fact, if you really are intelligent, the true function and purpose of intelligence is to tell you things you can't see with your senses. Otherwise, you don't need intelligence. You walk into the wall a few times, you get to know that you can't go through it. Intelligence means I don't have to walk into the wall. I figured it out. Can't walk through a wall. So intelligence is there not only primarily, but exclusively for abstract thinking. So to say, if I don't see it, it's not real, this is fourth grade. This is baby stuff. Even scientifically speaking. We've outgrown that like 200 years ago.
Going back to struggling with faith, to saying you shouldn't be struggling with faith, you should really be struggling with understanding, getting a better understanding. So come to this with the first realization that we're not talking about getting to faith. We're talking about getting to a better intellectual appreciation.
Christians struggle with faith. We don't.
Because we're struggling with intelligence, or because we don't have faith?
But,
we have faith,
first of all, faith is not a struggle. It is way too easy. That's what's wrong with it. It's way too easy. You don't have to think, you don't have to know, you don't have to understand. Again, it's fourth grade.
So it's really
childish.
So it's really, we are supposed to upgrade or mature from that and leave it kind of almost behind, it sounds. Well, I guess you always have to have it there more as a backbone.
You reserve faith for things unknown. Unknowable. Anything knowable, you cannot cop out by saying, I believe it. A scientist...
You're not allowed to?
No.
You shouldn't.
A scientist asked the Rebbe, we don't believe in life on other planets, do we? And the Rebbe said, you're a scientist. Go take a look. You're too lazy? What do you mean you believe you don't believe? This is knowable.
So what, there are things we're not supposed to, are the things we should not question? A Jew. It's not appropriate for a Jew to question.
Once you get into personal stuff, like what God wants, why God wants, you don't question that. And you don't do that to your spouse either. Once you know that something is important, you don't question it. So, well, why is it important? What makes it so important? That's nasty. But does God exist? Did he create the world? How did he create the world? When did he create the world? What do you mean you believe? That's just a cop-out. You're just brain dead. So if it's knowable, then figure it out. You reserve faith for things not knowable. And you have to explain why it's not knowable. Maybe it is knowable.